Snoozecast, the podcast designed to help you fall asleep. Find us on snoozecast.com and follow us on Instagram @Snoozecast to find behind-the-scenes content. If you enjoy our show, please write a review on the Apple Podcasts app. Please know that writing your review helps new listeners to find our show. Plus, we love to read them and hear about your experience. This episode is brought to you by our Patreon supporters and by Bejeweled Bangles. Tonight, we'll read the Hindu folk tale, The Fish Prince. It comes from Wonder Tales from Many Lands by Katherine Pyle, published in 1920, and is adapted by Snoozecast. This story features an ancient and still popular item of jewelry called a bangle. Bangles are circular in shape and, unlike bracelets, are not flexible. Although people in some part of India used to wear a thick single bangle as protection during battle, they are now worn mostly as adornment by women in many parts of the world. The oldest bangle was recently found to be at least 50,000 years old. It was masterfully crafted out of green stone by a species of early hominid that lived side by side with both Homo sapiens and Neanderthals. Let's get cozy. Close your eyes. Relax your body into the softness of your bed. Now, take a few deep breaths. There was once a Hindu queen and king known as a Rani and a Raja. The Rani had become quite melancholy and took no more pleasure in anything, as they had wished for a child but had none. One day, some fish were brought to the palace kitchen to be prepared as usual for the Raja's dinner. Among them was one such as the cook had never seen before. Its scales shone with all the colors of the rainbow, and upon its head was a mark that looked a little like a golden crown. The cook examined it curiously and then was about to prepare it for cooking, but it lifted up its head and spoke to him. "Please put me in the basin of water and carry me to the Rani, and it may be I will amuse her," the fish said to the cook. The cook was very much surprised to hear a fish speaking, and it seemed to him such a wonderful creature that it might very well amuse even the Rani. He therefore put it in a basin of water and gave it to a maid and bade her carry it to the queen. The maid did so, and the Rani was indeed very much pleased with the beautiful little fish. All day she kept it beside her and watched its quick movements and its changing colors. The next day she was even more pleased with it, and before long she became so fond of it that she could not have loved it better if it had been her own child. She named it Machi Raja, or the Fish Prince, and called it her son. After a time, the fish grew so large that it could no longer live in the basin, and then it was put in a marble bath. As it still continued to grow, the Rani had a great tank made for it out in the palace gardens. Here, every day, she went to visit it. She always carried some rice with her, and when she called it, the great fish would rise through the water and eat from her hand and play about where she could see it. But one day, when the Rani came to the tank, she saw Machi Raja lying on the water, very still. His colors looked dull, and when she called to him, he came to her slowly and would not eat the rice she had brought to him. The Rani was greatly troubled. "Alas, my dear son," she cried, "what is it that ails you? Are you sick, that you will not eat the good rice I have brought to you?" "I am not sick," answered the great fish, "but I am very lonely. My mother, I beg you to build me a cottage on the side of the tank and find a suitable young lady to live in it and to be company for me and hopefully become my wife." The Rani could refuse nothing to her dear Machi Raja. She immediately sent for masons and stone cutters and had a royal apartment made right along the side of the tank. The room was so cleverly built that the fish could reach his head over the side of it, and yet it was protected from the water in such a way that one could live in it safely. The walls of it were carved and colored and set with precious stones, so that it was very beautiful, and there were hanging lamps in it to give light by day and night. After all was finished, the Rani sent out messengers throughout the country to find some beautiful girl to come and live in the room and be the bride of her dear Machi Raja. To the parents of such a girl, she promised to give a large sack of gold coins. But though the messengers journeyed far and near, they could find no parents who were willing to give their daughter to the fish prince. "No, no way," they said. "Our daughters are worth more to us than a sack of gold coins. This Machi Raja is rumored to be very large and strong and fierce, and what he wishes is not a bride, but a snack to eat." Now, not far from the palace there lived a religious beggar, known as a mendicant or a fakir, whose wife had died and left him with one daughter. This girl, whose name was Balna, was very beautiful. After the death of his first wife, the religious beggar married again. The second wife also had a daughter, but her daughter was as ugly as Balna was beautiful, and as ill-tempered as Balna was sweet and gentle. The stepmother was very jealous of Balna and would have done anything to not see her again. One time the fakir went away on a long journey, leaving his house and all that was in it in the charge of his wife. The messengers were still seeking for a bride for the Machi Raja at this time, and as soon as the fakir had gone, his wife sent for them and said, "I have a daughter whom I am willing to let you have for the fish prince, and as she is very beautiful, I am sure you will be delighted with her." The messengers were very glad to hear this, and said they would come for the girl the next day, and bring a sack of gold coins to the woman in payment for her. After they had gone, the stepmother called Balna to her and told her what she had promised. The girl said, "Alas, what have you done? The great fish will certainly swallow me whole. If my father had been here, he would never have allowed you to do this." "This is silly talk," answered the stepmother. "Why should the fish eat you? He's lonely and wishes a companion. You ought to be proud and happy to be the wife of a Rajah, even if it's only a fish Rajah." She then bade the girl go down to the river and wash her sari, that she might be clean and neat when the messengers came for her. Balna took her silk sari and went down to the river to wash it, and as she washed it, she wept. Now it just so happened that a kind, old, 7-headed cobra had a hole in the bank of the river and lived there with his wife and children. He heard the sound of weeping just above him, and it kept on for so long that after a while he stuck one of his heads out of the hole and spoke to the girl. "Why are you weeping here?" he said. "Do you not know that your tears are dropping down into my house like rain, and that they are very salty?" "Oh, Father Cobra, excuse me," answered the girl, "but I have good cause to weep. My stepmother has sold me to be the bride of Muchi Raja, and I know he will certainly eat me, for he is very large and fierce." "Listen to me, daughter," said the cobra, "for I am very wise and know all things. This great fish you speak of is not a fish at all, but the Rajah of a far country. In some ways he became cursed, and as a punishment he was changed into the shape of a fish and sent to live in the river. Now, if you will do exactly what I tell you to do, you can break this enchantment and become his Rani. But if you do not do as I say, then he will certainly eat you." The cobra then gave the girl 3 stones and bade her tie them into the corner of her sari so as not to lose them. "Tomorrow the messengers will come and take you to Muchi Raja," he said. "They will put you in a little room in the side of the tank. When it is night, you must not on any account go to sleep, but take these stones in your hand and watch. When he comes near you, throw a stone at him. Immediately, he will sink to the bottom of the tank and will lie there for a while. When he comes again, throw the second stone at him, and he will again go away. And when he comes for the 3rd time, throw the 3rd stone. Then the enchantment will be broken, and he will resume his natural form, and you will have nothing to fear from him." The girl heard with joy what the cobra said to her. She thanked him and tied the stones in the corner of the sari, and then she ran on home again. When she went into the house, her stepmother was surprised to see how cheerful she had become. She no longer wept nor complained, and when, the next day, the messengers came for her, she was quite willing to go away with them. At the palace, the old Rani was waiting for the bride, and she was delighted when she saw what a beautiful girl the messengers had brought with them. Balna was taken out to the tank, and a great crowd of people followed to see what would become of her. Many of them wondered that she went so cheerfully, for they expected that she would be swallowed up by the great fish. After she was put in the little room in the side of the tank, the crowd waited about for a long time. Every moment they expected to see Machi Raja rise through the water, but nothing happened. The water lay still, and there was no sound but the lapping of the little waves against the stonework. After a while, night came, and the people grew tired of waiting and went away to their homes. Balna was left in the little room all alone. She untied the corner of her sari and took out the 3 stones. 2 she laid on the floor beside her, and 1 she kept in her hand. About midnight, the water was disturbed. The waves dashed against the stones. Machi Raja rose through the water and swam toward the room, and his scales were as red as rubies. Balna held the stone fast and waited. When he was almost near enough to her, she threw the first stone at him. Immediately, Machi Raja closed his jaws and sank down into the depths of the water where she could not see him. After that, she waited and watched for some time, but all was still. Then again, the waves dashed louder. They rose to the edge of the stonework. Machi Raja came rushing through the water again, and his scales were shining like fire. Balna stood firm, and she threw the second stone at him. Again he sank through the water, and all was still. This time he was gone longer than before, and the girl watched, wide-eyed. Then, suddenly, with a roaring sound, he came rushing at her again as his tail beat the waters into foam about him. Balna courageously managed to throw the third stone at him. No sooner did it touch Machi Raja than the enchantment was broken. Instead of the great fish, a handsome young Raja stood there before her. He was dressed in cloth of gold embroidered in wonderful colors. His turban was fastened with an enormous ruby, and on his breast hung a chain set with precious stones. He took Balna by the hand and spoke to her. "You have saved both my life and your own," he said. "The enchantment is broken, and now we can live happily together, and you shall be my royal bride." Very early the next morning, the Rani and her attendants came out to the tank to see what had happened to the girl. What was their surprise to find that in the tank room, not only Balna, but a handsome young prince, who told them he was Machi Raja. He also told them how Balna had broken the enchantment, and that now he would marry her and live in his own proper shape forever. Then there was great rejoicing, and the old Raja and Rani adopted the fish prince as their own son, and Balna was to them in place of a daughter. When the fakir's wife heard what had happened to Balna, and how, instead of being eaten by the fish, she had become the bride of a great Raja, she was full of rage However, she hid her feelings and went to the palace and made friends with Balna. She pretended that she had only wished her well and had known all along how it would turn out. Balna, who was very simple and forgiving, believed all the wicked stepmother said to her. She made her and the stepsister welcome at the palace and gave them many gifts, but they only plotted how they could get back at her for her good fortune. One time, Balna and her stepmother and her stepsister went down to walk by the river in the cool of the afternoon. Presently, the stepsister began to admire the young Rani's jewels, and she asked Balna to let her try them on. "For," she said, "I have never worn such beautiful jewels as those are." Balna was quite willing, and she took off the jewels and put them upon her sister. The armlets, the necklaces, the rings, and the bracelets. Just at the last step, the stepsister allowed one of the earrings to fall to the ground. "Look," she cried, "I have dropped an earring. Will you pick it up for me, Balna? For I fear that if I stoop, others may fall off too." The young Rani stooped for the earring. Then the stepmother gave her such a push that she fell into the river. The place where she fell in was very deep, and she sank out of sight immediately. The two wicked women waited there for a while, but they saw nothing of her, so then they went back to the palace. The stepsister was still wearing all of Balna's jewels, and she was so covered up with them that everyone thought she was the young Rani. They went at once to Balna's apartments, and there the fakir's wife put her daughter to bed and gave out that the Rani was very ill and could see no one. It was a long time before even Machi Raja himself was allowed to enter the room. When he did, he was shocked to see how his beautiful bride had changed. "It is because of her illness," said the fakir's wife. "Wait until she is well again, then all will be as it was before." The young Raja never doubted but that it was his bride who lay there, but he was so sad to see the change in his delicate Rani. Still, he was kind to her and often came to visit her in her apartments. Now, it so happened that the place where Balna had fallen into the river was close to where the old seven-headed cobra had his hole. He had heard the voices overhead and then a great splash. He looked out to see what had caused it, and there he saw the young Rani in the water. He felt sorry for her and reached out and drew her into his hole. Then he carried her up to where she could get some air, for his hole had two openings, one into the river and one out onto the bank overhead. The young Rani presently came to herself again. Then she wished to set out for the palace at once, but this the cobra would not allow her to do. "Your stepmother and your sister are there even now," he said, "and if you went back, they would certainly do some harm. Stay here with me, and if your husband, the Raja, comes to look for you, I will let you go back with him, but not otherwise. When Balna heard this, she was sad, but she was obliged to stay there in the cobra's hole, as he said. After a time, her little son was born there, and she named him Muchilal, the ruby fish, after his father. The little Muchilal grew up strong and straight and handsome, and the old cobra became so fond of him that he almost loved him better than he did his own children. There was scarcely anything he would refuse him. One day, a bangle seller came past the cobra's hole, and Muchilal wished to buy some of his bangles. But the cobra said, "No, these are very common bangles, and not suitable for a prince to wear. I will give the man some jewels, and he shall make for you bangles such as you ought to have." The cobra then brought from his treasure house a number of diamonds and rubies and other precious stones. He gave them to the bangle seller. "Take these," he said, "and make them into bangles, and bring them back to me as quickly as possible, and you shall be well paid. And remember, they must be very handsome, for they are for this prince, Muchilal." The bangle seller took the stones home with him and made the bangles, and they were finished in a week's time. Then he started out to carry them back to the cobra. They were very handsome, and he was so proud of them that he carried them so that everyone might see. Now, on his way, it so chanced that he met Machi Raja, and the prince was so surprised to see a poor man carrying such costly bangles that he stopped and began to question him. "Those are some very handsome jewels," said he. "I've never seen finer. Even I myself have none like them. Tell me, how did you come by them?" "They're not mine," answered the bangle seller. "They belong to an old 7-headed cobra who lives down by the river. He gave them to me to make into bangles for a young prince named Muchilal, who lives with him." The Rajah was very much surprised at what the bangle seller told him. "Well, this is a strange story," said he. "I'll go with you, for I should like to see this young prince who lives in a cobra's hole." So Machi Raja went down to the river bank with the bangle seller. Muchilal was there, playing close to the cobra's hole with the young cobras. When he saw the bangle seller, he ran to meet him, calling to him to know whether he had brought the bangles. And the young prince was so exactly like his mother, the beautiful Balna, that the Rajah was filled with joy and sorrow. "Tell me, child," he cried, "who are you, and who was your mother?" "I am Muchilal," answered the boy, "and my mother is the Rani Balna, and we live here by the river in the hole of an old 7-headed cobra." Then Machi Raja knelt down by the cobra's hole and called, "My dear wife, if it is you and you are still alive, answer me." Balna heard his voice down in the cobra's hole and came running out and threw herself into his arms. "I've waited so long for you," she cried, but you have come at last, and now I can go back with you to the palace. So they were very happy. Only the cobra was sad to have them go, and the cobra's children were grieved to lose their little playmate. But he promised them to come back sometimes and play with them there by the river. Then the Raja and the Rani and Machi Lal all went back to the palace together, and there was great rejoicing. But when the fakir's wife and her daughter heard that Balna was still alive and that her husband had found her, they ran away and hid themselves in the deep forest, and no one has ever heard of them again.